Welcome to this week's CTO Studio episode. We talk about engineering culture, product management, KPIs, and we ask a crucial question which none of us could answer. How do you measure productivity?
I have a wonderful electronic invention I want you to see. It looks something like this.
Welcome to the CTO Studio. I'm your host, Etienne de Bruin. The CTO Studio is where we chat with CTOs building amazing products with incredible teams. Have you chatted with a CTO lately? Michael Young, Robert Swisher, Brant Cooper, welcome to the CTO Studio.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
We are at a round table for those who can't see us, and I am supremely happy to have these gentlemen around the table.
But we're happy to be here.
Thank you.
All three of us, really.
So, Michael, you're former CTO of Redfin, former CTO of Classy. Is it Classy or Classy?
Classy.
And now you're doing some technology consulting around the due diligence process, investigating or sort of looking into people's technology strategy, their stack, and helping acquirers make good decisions, but also helping startups in the process to kind of see what they don't know that they don't know, or perhaps deflate the bubble a little bit around what they think they do know.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I've been in technology for 20 plus years, been kind of in a CTO or chief architect role for, over 15 of that, the last 15. And now I've kind of crossed over to the other side, and I'm working more with the investors, private equity, to not only do the due diligence for them, and a large part of that is just simply translating the technology, going from AWS and technical bits and bytes to here's the business value, here's why we're doing it, here's why it's valuable. You may not see the long-term potential of certain things in the technology, but it's there, or here's some risks you may not be aware of. So being a bridge between the investors who are finance people, basically, by and large, and the technology people has been really interesting, really fun. And, being able to pass on some advice and recommendations to the startups that I see, many of them very early stage, Series A type investments. So it's been fun.
Are you seeing products and innovations that are exciting you right now, or is it?
We mostly focus on like business SaaS. So to be honest, it's not like people are inventing, new, really incredible secret things. They're really looking at business problems and coming up with systems that are, well optimized to solve that. It might be a new platform for dentist offices to interact with, customers and introduce things like Net Promoter Score, things like that. Things that might be sensible in a larger company, but all these niche businesses just, they haven't quite caught up to some of these broader platforms out there.
Are you geographically focused at all? Are these San Diego, California, Silicon Valley?
No, been all over East Coast, Midwest. The folks that I work with tend to invest in areas that are not as mainstream. So I actually have not done a deal in Silicon Valley. It's usually some smaller, mostly smaller cities and other areas. So they're kind of zigging when everyone is zagging, really.
How many of your conversations are with the CTO, and how compared to this with the whole founding team?
Yeah, that's a great question. The purpose of technical due diligence is really to focus on the technical team. So by and large, we are talking to the CTO, but oftentimes there's no CTO. So who do you talk to? So it might be the CEO who's very technical, or a COO who's running the engineering team, or even a couple of cases where there's really no executive, and so you're just talking to the technical lead, or a senior kind of developer, engineering manager type, and the CEO is not technical, but they're managing them, and so between those you're having that conversation. So it's interesting. Those are a little bit more challenging than the seasoned CTO who has everything in his head and kind of can answer all the questions right off the bat.
How often is that part of your recommendation, saying, hey, you guys need to go find a CTO here really quickly?
It is fairly common, especially when you don't have one.
It's funny how often I talk to founders who are, I would say, in angel stage, who come to me because they want a CTO, and how often I say to them, you don't need a CTO. You just need a product. Just get that product built. I usually ask them, do you have an idea of the solution that you want to present to your market? Do you have maybe 20K? And then do you have some sort of unfair advantage that you can sort of help insert this product into whatever distribution? Like your uncle is somebody who can also use this product, and for me, if you have those things happening, I feel like you can just sort of outsource development and just get it done so you can insert something.
That's way too practical at the end. I mean, what they're hearing is from somebody they've talked to a mentor who told them, no, you can't get money without a CTO.
Oh.
So that's why they're running out and getting a CTO.
Oh, so they okay.
Right. So instead of actually launching a product that people want, right, and then figuring out what's the management team that's going to make me succeed, they're going like, no, I want investment, so I need a CTO.
Or I think people are confused what that even is, right? They're like, oh, I need a CTO, and really you need like a technical person to do the technical work, right? Yeah. But you don't need the senior executive in an early stage company like that.
I think that's exactly right? It's I need a technical co-founder,
yeah.
And since they're a co-founder and they're technical, they're my CTO.
Right, exactly.
When is a good time to have a CTO, do you think?
Well, I mean, the earlier the better, but I've certainly seen companies that get to, several million in revenue without one, and the business looks good, and somehow they've figured it out, whether it was a semi-technical CEO or even a very technical CEO kind of filling in and then, managing the team. I think the super early stage, you might need, a CTO by reputation, but when you actually have real revenue and showing, good cash flow, then, the investors can just look at the business and say, oh, this is a good business, and okay, we'll help you find the right team, whoever that is.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think I'll go back to, I don't think that they know the difference between, say, a VP of engineering or a director of engineering and a CTO. And so again, if you're sort of self-designated as the CEO, then I need my technical co-founder, then they must be a CTO. And they haven't really thought through what those different roles are and the responsibilities. And yeah, my CTO is going to code my product. Okay.
Right, right, exactly.
I want you to code my product, and we can call you the CTO.
Right.
And that's the other problem I have is when that early stage CTO comes in, and the company does start generating revenues, and the viability starts setting in. That person is still seen as the person who came in coding for free.
Right.
And doesn't have the seat at the strategic table, and I had an amazing conversation just 2 days ago where the CEO was asking, he wanted to give his CTO some advice on how to measure which parts of their app is being used, and he was trying to tell his CTO which tools to use, and I was like, okay, I think it's a little lopsided. I feel like the CTO should come to you and say, listen, this is how we're going to measure,
right,
tooling wise, what's going to happen. And then he said to me, well, I want to do the business decisions, and then I want him to make the tech decisions. And then again, I was saying, because tech needs to support business, the more your CTO knows about the business, the closer aligned the tech is going to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there just seems to be this archaic view that I'm the one with the idea, I'm the CEO, I have the product idea, I founded the company, I just need someone to go and build that for me. When really you're asking for a collaborator who might not fully agree with what you want to do.
I couldn't agree more. And, one of the symptoms I've seen is, you'll see, fairly large organizations get to the point where the CEO, they haven't hired a product manager. Like they think they're the product manager, and they're gonna have their vision, and that, the engineers are gonna go off and build that. And you can see a lot of symptoms of that.
Well, and good luck trying to explain what a product manager does to a lot of, business executives too, right? Like getting buy-in on why product matters and why it exists, that's tough.
I was going to ask the same question about, whether they've hired a CTO. I was wondering if you get involved at all and whether the technical due diligence really is about, well, what you really need is, product management.
That's very common.
Well, I think, like, in particular, I think San Diego, is a little bit behind in terms of product management practices and design practices and some of these things that are not only core to the product, but these days they're core to the business as well, right? So that's a lot of the stuff that my company teaches is, lean innovation space is getting out and understanding the customers and all of those type of things. And you can't really separate things into the technical side of the house and the business side of the house anymore. They need to be integrated.
Yeah, I have this like pet theory, like if you look around, there are a lot of very experienced VPs of engineering, CTOs, because that's kind of the ceiling. Like they don't want to go any more than that. They don't want to be CEO. They just want to run the engineering team. So many PMs end up evolving into the CEO role. Like they go off and start their own company. They get hired into a CEO role. So like you just don't have that depth of experience. The bench strength isn't quite there. And you're right, San Diego even more so. Whereas up in Seattle, you've got Microsoft or Amazon producing, large organizations, tons of PMs, really good training, really good structure there. The Bay Area is kind of weird, but tons of PMs there too, at least experienced ones who've made all the mistakes. San Diego, you just don't see that,
Yeah, we're starting to see a little bit of it because of Intuit, I think. Intuit's always had really strong product management, and so they're getting back out into the community. But
yeah.
I was also fascinated recently. I feel like when it comes to matters of technology, a non-technical founder might have a healthy respect for, well, I can't do the technology, I don't understand the technology. So there's sort of that acknowledgement, okay, I can't do this. I don't see that on the product side. Right. On the product side, there's not I actually can't do this because there's a discipline and there's a classical and it's like, no, I can do the product. We just add this and we do this and the people want this. And so I think the not the flippancy, but just the recklessness with which people often say products need A, B, and C, then hoping that technology can quickly go and do that.
When I was doing product management, we talked about what I came up with as marketecture. So there was an engineering equivalent of it that was called architecture.
Tell us about Moves the Needle, Brant, CEO, founder of Moves the Needle, New York Times bestseller.
Well, so Moves the Needle basically brings what we call the entrepreneurial spirit to very large enterprises. And by entrepreneurial spirit, we talk about a combination of design thinking for the empathy work. Lean startup brings some of the rigor of experimentation, and then looking at the evidence in order to make decisions about what you should be doing next. We also put that into sort of an agile light framework. So the way we organize the teams is using agile principles. We don't go and do Scrum like for engineering groups or do Scrum for even other parts of the company, but they are adapting the agile principles using some of those methodologies so that you're figuring out how to balance between what are the things that we need to execute on and what are the things that we need to go out and learn about using the empathy and the experiment techniques. So we work with innovation teams, product teams, commercialization teams, really from the front line to the C-suite in learning how to implement some of these ideas.
And then the word that stands out there for me is empathy. Is that sort of the first thing that these teams sort of lack or might not be aware of that they lack?
Well, it actually goes back to the way you were describing how often these startups divide up the company, and you've got the technical side and you've got the product side. And of course, as you get more mature, you've got the customer support side and the sales and the marketing. And we define rules about what are those people allowed to do and how are they allowed to interact with each other. And so sort of the more mature the company is, including startups, the fewer people that are allowed to talk to customers. And so that's how you start creating these silos, and a company becomes less and less agile because they have no idea really what problems they're solving for. I was at a lean software conference one time, and this influential lean software woman, Mary Poppendick, was talking about, at some point, engineers are supposed to be engineering solutions to problems, not just writing the specifications that somebody else gave to them. And so I think that hopefully using these lean innovation principles, we're getting back to that. So yes, engineers themselves should be going out and getting empathy for the customers, because then when they go back, when they go back to build products, they're actually building solutions for people's problems.
Absolutely. Like I love everything you just said. Could not agree more. I wanted to applaud during that, but obviously that's not going to translate well. But yeah, I totally agree. Getting the engineers close to the stakeholders, getting the engineers to understand the customer, the why we're doing things, not just, hey, someone hands you this project, now go code it up, code monkey, you know what I mean? But because engineers are smart people too. They're going to come up with product innovations. They're going to have ideas that work. They're going to, everyone in the company should know that. Your engineers.
So where does the product management fit into that?
They're attached at the hip to your technical leader, and they work hand in hand on everything.
Because when I was CTO of my startup, I started doing open allocation as a form of agile principles in implementation of agile, where engineers could basically pick what they wanted to work on. Mm-hmm. And projects had to be written in a way that was enticing for the engineer, and it include the problem being solved, the innovation, and all that. So projects were competing for people, not people competing for the cool projects. Anyways, but that did require a level of empathy for the product. And what I started seeing was a general resistance for the amount of hours and energy it takes from coding with your headphones on, determining your own day, your priorities for your day, to being thrown into this crazy world of conversing and debating and analyzing and understanding, to the point where my engineers basically said to me, we don't want to do this anymore. Just tell us what to code. Mm-hmm. Because it's too exhausting to have all that empathy. It's way too exhausting.
Well, at a certain scale, it just, the peer-to-peer just doesn't work. You need to put an intermediary. You need to, whether it's the product manager or the engineering manager or support, or somebody needs to translate that noise, or maybe use a system. There are various systems, online forms, and turn that into data that, is actionable. Like, hey, here's the priority feature list. We put this on some form, and the customers voted 10-1 to go. Hey, let's just go do that. Let's knock that out and make those guys happy, right? But they don't want to sit there and have all those conversations and feel like they have to have 10 calls to justify what they're about to do.
Yeah,
so,
the way I try to think about it, or get people to think about it, is it's based upon the level of uncertainty. And so if you can run a digital experiment in order to determine what color our button should be, you don't need to go do empathy interviews for that, right? And so we already do that type of split testing. It could be, though, that there's a user story. Hopefully the user story has been, maybe it's been written by the product manager, and that product manager has gone out and validated that. So they've actually done a bunch of the work to validate the user stories. But when it comes to actually implementing it, there may be questions that the engineers themselves have about what is the best way to implement. And maybe they can learn something by just going and visiting the customer environment. And so it's sort of having this self-awareness of around, I could just write up a feature, and maybe it'll work, and maybe it won't. But is there something that I could actually go learn deeper? And no, I don't have to go hug my customers. But what I'm trying to do is understand the environment and understand the problem deeper, so that then I can go back to my team and design the right solution. But on stuff where there's very little uncertainty, we know what we need to build, then there's no reason to call up a customer and validate that on the phone. That's just a waste of time.
That's a great point, and the nature of the product may tell you. If it's a consumer-facing product that the developers would use themselves, like if it was iOS or something, and they're power users of it, there's not, they can empathize pretty clearly. I mean, they may need to gather more data. Maybe their own personal opinions are too biased, but if they're working on something like real estate brokerage services, and they're not a real estate, they probably need to spend a little extra time understanding that market, understanding those folks, and getting a little bit more empathy, because that's just not their daily they don't have any frame of reference to kind of understand that. So yeah, you're right. It really just depends on how much they need it.
And if you're adding features to an existing product, then that's less uncertainty than developing a new product. So yeah, I think it's just if people think about it in terms of the this continuum of a level of uncertainty sort of dictates how much of that empathy and experiment work you should be doing.
And so just thinking through teams of engineers and product people, and then juxtaposed or engaging customers. Do you have a sense for what a good team looks like, is composed of? Is it? I really like the idea of customer visits in as much as it helps developer empathy. I know firsthand what it does for my engineers when I see them using the product that they're building. But how does one structure a team so that you keep fueling that product innovation without dicking around with the engineering productivity? And what I see the worst case of that is where there's sort of this distrust that starts forming between the product advocate and the implementers, and how does one compose that team so that you have a healthy sort of flow, customer, product, output? How does that work?
Yeah, I don't think there's a right or wrong way.
Let the record reflect everyone left the room.
Everyone's backing up away from the mic. There's no right or wrong way. Some people are still doing waterfall. Most people are in agile with small teams. There's a fairly well-known set of blog posts, videos from Spotify showing kind of their tribes and chapters, and how they have an engineering manager with a large number of engineers, but they're all split up into kind of feature-oriented groups. 5, 6 developers at most, with a product owner and maybe a scrum master, maybe not. Someone takes that mantle. There are different ways to do it. I think the pattern that is common across all of these agile teams is just small teams owning their own sort of independent project, being able to release frequently. Everyone's trying to, speed up the pace of innovation, and by releasing, really committing that code, saying, I'm confident enough to get that into production. And by the way, everyone take a look. We've check us, make sure that what we're building is right, even if it's behind a feature flag or not. So these are all just common ways to iterate in efficient small teams, giving the team independence, giving them sort of ownership. It's almost like the military, the U.S. military versus like the old Soviet. You have small independent teams taking initiative versus like this very top-down command infrastructure, trying to push that.
Right. The two analogies I use are the Spotify model, but then the Special Forces model is the other thing. You're given a mission. So who do I need on that mission? And so if you're working on low uncertainty parts of the product, and you're assigned a metric, typically in the Spotify model, so you have to move this metric, then you're going to go and choose the right people in order for that autonomous group to move that number. If you are working on something that was in the marketing funnel instead of in a product improvement, you still might need engineering people on there or technical people in order to design experiments or to do prototyping or something like that. And so the makeup of the team might include customer support and sales and marketing and a couple of engineers, but it's driven by the metric and what the desired outcome is.
It makes me think of that concept of mob programming, kind of where you're like, I'm going to get everybody I need in the room together working at the same time to accomplish this task, and whoever we need to pull in for that, that's how we're going to do it, which is I think is the best way.
Yeah, I think what I struggle with in that sense is that you're giving a lot of people a voice that maybe shouldn't have a voice.
That should be worked out in the team dynamics, though. So if you're right. Well, actually, maybe we should just ignore Etienne on that one.
Well, I'm like, so you're saying like we should keep you off this team? That is what you're telling me here.
I'm saying that there's a lot of people who are super passionate and they think they know what the answers are, but they just don't know what the fuck they're talking about.
But shouldn't the team dynamic actually figure that out?
I think that the team. What if the team is not? You've had introverts on there. You have.
Well, to me, if hopefully the nature of the agile practices that you've put into place actually give voice to the introverts and that if somebody is wildly out of their league, that will be taken care of by the team.
Yeah.
And we could use this table again as an example if we wanted to.
It's funny again because I hear that like, oh, that guy, just we don't want to hear from but it's kind of like democracy. You kind of want everyone to have a voice. You want a period where everyone has their say. Not everyone has decision-making power, right? There are a few people who will say, "Great, we've heard from everybody. This was the time to, speak your mind. All right, here are the people who are going to go off and make a decision now. Great, thank you." So, let those folks have their say. Otherwise it's just gonna sit there and turn toxic. Perhaps maybe not always, but it can. But that I think you want that bottoms up culture, especially among the engineers. We all know engineers are very smart, very opinionated, very successful all through their careers to get to that point, and they want to have their say. But then
It's sort of, what's the alternative anyway? I mean, that person that is way out of their league might be your boss. And if they're actually just in a hierarchical institution is making the decisions, then that's not a great way to go either.
I agree. So then what do we do as CTO types? I mean, now our job becomes having everyone feel included, but then still go and do what we think we should be doing.
But it's not, again, what we were saying is that the teams are given a very specific mandate, and they've got a product owner who's driving what the outcomes should be. So it's not like a free-for-all, and it's not about, like, the desired outcome is not that everybody feels included. I think that's a agile principle that we want people's voice to be heard, but the desired outcome of the project is not people feel included, or else you're not really a product company anymore.
Right. There need to be goals and objectives at the company level, and every team should try to align to that.
I think the misunderstanding then could be you're so trying to have a culture of inclusivity and conversation and collaboration that the product ends up being completely schizophrenic because certain things are important to certain people, and then you try and manage that for everybody.
But yeah, everything can't be a decision by committee. That never works, right? So
But is that where the product manager has a strong voice then? Like, listen, I know you want this, but this is not what we're going to do.
Yeah, the PM should be one of the decision makers. There should be some clear data showing why certain decisions, what certain priorities are made, one project over another. Absolutely.
And they should be mapping the outcome of that project or whatever that team is working on to whatever priorities they've been given by management. I mean, I think that one of the potential advantages of these type of structures is that the work that teams do can be tied directly to the desired outcomes on a company level. Whereas I think in a hierarchical method, typically we're measuring performance based upon KPIs. What are the repeated tasks that individuals are doing? And we hope that if everybody does their repeated tasks, that the outcome is what our strategic priorities are. But if you're running a Spotify group and they're supposed to be moving the active user, the engagement metric for a particular part of the product, then you're going to be able to map that to reducing churn or increasing subscribers, and so that's more money, and you tie that to the objectives. You can actually draw straight lines instead of just sort of this magic. We hope that this work will result in those outcomes.
And it goes back to what you were saying earlier, just talking about being a data-driven company, doing the experiments, having reason and data to back up those decisions. So it's less about, well, my gut says this or I think that.
Right.
You lean into that.
I was going to add. Ultimately, all of this stuff is to be able to recruit, retain, and engage your most talented employees, if not all of your employees. Like all of this stuff, whether it's pretty offices, kombucha, all the stuff you do, it's like keep them happy and engaged, right? Because that's business-wise, you're going to get the most productivity out of a team who's totally into what they're doing, challenged, however, whatever it takes to keep them engaged. And if they need to speak up and have their say, great, let them do that, but then steer them towards, as Brant said, the objectives that the company has set out, make sure they're not way off course and totally deviating from that. Absolutely.
So here we have a bunch of CTOs talking about culture. I mean, so I'm curious now, when you go into the companies that you're working with, do the culture things come up as well?
Absolutely. It's a key area to kind of evaluate, and it's the right thing for someone like myself, a former CTO, to do, because it's hard to understand what is a good culture. Ultimately, it's about recruiting, retention, and happy developers, happy technology folks producing a lot and going to produce more, that the investors will end up caring about. And vice versa, if there's a really horrible, toxic environment with low morale and there's a high turnover rate, you're like, ooh, that's a red flag. If I'm an investor, I don't know if I want to,
really, no matter how well the product's doing at that point, because that's a pretty big red flag right there.
Is that so? In this world of investment and all that, it's all about the engagement, right? Engaged users.
You're talking. I was talking about the employees.
No. On outside of that, sort of when it starts coming to measuring the success of companies, it's that daily active engaged.
Yep. That's a frequent thing. A lot of these it's business software. A lot of what I focus on. So sometimes that metric is a little different. It's not like messaging software like Facebook, who has an incredible engagement number compared to, say Twitter or something like that. It's hard to tell, but man, does that make Facebook that much more valuable. With business software, it's a little different. There might be software that's used for compliance reasons, and so there's no user that needs to be in there every day, maybe once a month or a couple times a month, or in response to certain compliance type questions. But the value to the business of each one of those is high. It's just not an engagement metric that is a KPI. That's a key thing for them to pay attention to.
Love it.
I want to go back. Let me ask you something about the culture piece.
Sure.
So everybody always talks about culture. I'm curious what you guys think. It's important to have, but how do you instill that in a company in the very beginning? What are your thoughts on how to start a culture from scratch?
I think you start meetings on time.
Are you looking at me?
I think so. I'm gonna kind of ask that question with you. Sometimes the joy of a startup relies so much on that founder's raw passion and excitement for the market that is being addressed, but it makes them reckless as far as nurturing and building up that company culture, because left unchecked, the company culture can also become sort of more like, hey, we just do meetings whenever, we show up whenever, and a lot of the old school, very successful entrepreneurs will say to me, make sure that you have regular meetings and that they start on time. And it's, it just providing some level of structure. Is that a way to establish culture? Or, what is the blueprint?
I think that's one element. I think it's a lot of things, and certainly having that self-discipline and professionalism instilled, which is, I think, the ultimate sort of value out of that is a good thing, no doubt about it. Having open conversations and letting employees challenge, the executives, I think is a big, so the early founders, no doubt, set the tone on culture and what they believe is the right way to run a company, and how, it ends up indubitably being how the culture is created. I think after a certain size, after getting to 50 people, and then getting your round where you think you're going to hire another 100 people, that's where you start codifying your core values, having the corporate retreat. It sounds corny, the corporate retreat, but then just writing it down and saying, these are our 5 or 6 core values. Let's put it on our website so that when we hire people, they know what we're about, we know what we're hiring for, all of that, and you retain those values and what's important to the people who work there. So
yeah, I've had to do all of that work even earlier. So we're at 16 employees, and we've codified that quite a bit. And it's been by demand. We're a completely distributed company, which I think is part of it. I think that if you're mostly in one place, then the culture is formed by people's behavior. And so if you're a leader and your door's open and you actually walk the floor and you're talking to people and you're open and you're sharing, sharing business things, like I'm not a completely open book about financials, but I do want people to understand, the performance of the company and those type of things. But if you're all in one place, then it really is the behavior that everybody sees and the behavior that people do that establishes that culture. In a distributed team, it's way more complex, and so I think that's why we codified that really early. A strong mission statement, strong values, and then over time you start adding what the expected behaviors are that are mapped to those values. And then it also does evolve, and you figure out that the way you've codified it maybe isn't working right, and so you have to make changes. I think that I don't know. I guess I still struggle with it. I think that I've always been one that really has tried to empower people, but you actually have to teach people how to be empowered, and so I had to learn that I had to learn that's actually an active step, and it's sort of counterintuitive in that way. So I think we all, and you actually, there's a personal accountability on the other side that your employees are also actively creating the culture, and so they have to understand what their role is in the culture creation. So it's super interesting. I think it does have to start right away, and I wish there was a blueprint.
I asked the question because I think it's a lot like we were talking about product earlier, where so many people talk about culture and they think culture is like the perks that you have. Culture is, we let people bring their dog to work. That's our culture. It's like, no, it's all these other things that we're discussing are really important, but similarly with product, I think people just don't really know. They're thinking about the wrong things, or how do we get people to understand that better?
Yeah, I think just as a founder of my small company, how many decisions I make every day where I can either choose to just do it myself and answer the question they're asking versus, hey, what would you do? And without being patronizing, but just like, hey, so you can totally make that decision and invite people, like you said, teach them how to be empowered.
There's so many great leadership books out now. I think we understand so much more these days about leadership and the psychology of management and of how people work together. And so I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, I never read any of these books, and now I'm reading all of them. And so I think it's really great. I think we've learned a lot about how to manage and empower and motivate and reward people. So I think it's definitely an evolving science.
Wow. Yeah, the couple times that I've been through a challenging time with my people, where the temptation is to say, well, now I'm taking that responsibility away, or I'm taking you away. If you can get through that, I've seen people sort of break through a ceiling and realize, okay, I'm so valued that my voice is so much stronger at the table, and I'm seeing that big time right now.
Yeah, that is a great point. That I know personally, I've been guilty in the past of focusing on the mistake and not on the person's potential to learn and sort of overcome that long term. And it's kind of cliche, but it's really when you just look at people and their potential, then you look at those situations a little bit differently, and you say, well, this is just a learning opportunity. Just give them that chance to grow from that.
And opportunity is like the operative word there, right? That's how you really have to think about it.
One thing that has helped me tremendously with that has been to see the breakdown, not in that person's trust in me or my trust in them or their loyalty to me, but to see the breakdown in the process, to just say, oh, the process failed us because, yes, you made an assumption. It just means that you read the SOP differently than I did. So we actually focus all our attention now on checklists and playbooks, and it's been unbelievable to codify the company in terms of these SOPs, which, SOP is 1970s, right? But it gives you an incredible opportunity to just say, it's not you, it's the process. And then to how do we upgrade or optimize that process? But it's got nothing to do with my faith that you can do this job. And then that's where I said, I've seen multiple times in the last couple of years how that has completely upgraded that person's voice at the table and their sense of ownership.
So Gary Ridge, CEO of WD-40 here in San Diego, co-wrote a book with Ken Blanchard, who is one of the really founding thought leaders on service-based leadership. And the subtitle of the book is, "Don't Measure My Performance, Teach Me How to Get an A." And I love that, and I just sort of I think about that often.
Teach me how to get an A.
Right. So don't focus on how well or poorly I did. Teach me how to do what it is that needs to be done.
And I mean, coming back to culture, that's probably what it's all about. I'm not afraid of silences.
We were all just like really, you were going deep on your.
Just blew minds. I was like, whoa, hold on, I gotta reel it back in here.
Well, so I could throw out a couple of other books. Dare to Lead by Brené Brown. Multipliers is an amazing book, so you can teach other people how to be great leaders, and that's where you potentially get sort of this exponential type of behavior. So I think that I don't really know what went down at Zappos, but remember a few years ago when the whole holacracy thing was kind of blowing up and like half the company left or something like that, and my perception of that was exactly what you were saying, was that it was like, oh well, yeah, our culture means that I don't have to come in 8 hours a day and I get to do this and I get to do that, and I'm all like, well, okay, that's fair, as long as you're having the impact that you're signed up to have.
Right.
You have to be able to, you have to have the great culture has to be with performance. If you're not getting the performance, then you can't have all of these.
Yeah, there still has to be accountability, and there has to be objective, right? So, like, I'm a big proponent of leading by objective, and if you can, get that done, being in the office at weird hours or whatever it takes, great. Like, as long as we're meeting our obligations or meeting our goals. But I think a lot of people just, again, going back to the thing of, oh, well, culture means that we have all these great perks. You sort of like lose sight of the mission, and now you're just thinking about all this extra stuff instead of what we're all really here to do,
Right. But then how does it, so how do you handle it when the objective is not met? So objective was, the goal was clear, everyone collaborated, everyone made their agreements, everyone's going to do their thing. But then, 2 months shows up, or with all their iterations, whatever, and the company did not meet that objective.
Well, and in software, the objectives are often not met. It's often late.
Yes.
So there's this question. When you brought up accountability, the first question was, well, who's defining what productivity? It's so hard to measure productivity among developers. It's such a creative process. There are new requests or tweaks along the way. It's like I make the analogy to building a house. When you have like change orders to like, oh, let's rearrange the room, let's put up, it's like that slows things down. That makes it much harder. Everyone can intuit that. Software, they just don't get it. Like, oh yeah, we'll just throw a few buttons.
Right.
That'll be cheap, right? It's like, no.
Can't we
It's
just,
only code.
Isn't it a snippet of code? Like, you just copy paste that from somewhere else.
My CEO used to do sound effects. You can just drag it, floop, and it just go floop, and I'm just like, what are you doing, bro?
You can just drag it.
Man.
I'm curious if you get, like, how do you measure product? How do you respond to somebody asking you, oh, are you being productive? Is your team productive or not? Like, how do you try to quantify or somehow relate to the rest of the business?
Yeah,
who all invariably think it's not going fast enough. I'm not getting my features.
Yeah, that's an endless battle. I don't have a great answer. I mean, we measure things, right? You look at burn downs and you look at, what's the output on a regular basis, sprint to sprint, and you look for like big anomalies. So if something goes way down or something goes way up, you're like, why did that happen? But really, you just kind of want to maintain a level there. And as long as that's happening, then you're probably doing okay. But it's so hard to know. And, the business will ask this all the time, like, are you getting the most out of the team that you can? How do you ever figure that out?
You're right, and I want to hear what you have to say. But what I tend to look at symptoms as an indication of how it's affecting productivity, and I know that when I, even as CTO, was not being that productive, certain things would start happening. Like I would show up to the office less. I wouldn't be proactive about my communication to not my team, but to my C-suite. And I almost want to say, if you feel like you've been productive, there are certain things that you're going to do. Like you're probably going to be slightly friendlier. You're probably going to be more inquisitive. You're going to feel good about yourself. I don't think we are wired to feel good about ourselves if we haven't been productive. I mean, I think we are just wired to feel good about our work. And so I make a point, so as a tactical thing, for every company I help out as CTO, I have a CTO journal. And I make a point of pretending like I am every single day talking to my C-suite, and I bullet point the work I did, and I have a rich conversation with them in my head, but in a Google Doc. And I've noticed that on the days where I didn't get shit done because I was tired or because I was out of the zone or I didn't feel like I was in the flow, I don't update that document. And so I actually have a historical document where I can see how productive I've felt. And now, one could argue, well, you could maybe not feel productive, but really you did a lot of work. So there's that extreme. But I would sort of look at how is the team showing up as a canary in the coal mine kind of thing. But how to actually quantifiably measure productivity? I mean, is it points in Jira? I mean,
the question is
velocity
is why. I mean, I think. So I hate to go back.
I was hoping for an applause, by the way, from you.
Oh,
guys,
I'm sorry.
But okay.
We were silently applauding.
Consider it a golf clap. I think that, going back to Agile, I think that if you're doing sprint planning correctly, then your productivity should be that you're achieving what you set out to in your sprints. And I think that early on, that's difficulty because you don't necessarily know what the cadence is. But over time, you should be estimating things better. I think that the retros then also become important. So if people are doing regular retrospectives to figure out, what went wrong and maybe do some 5 whys or just a 2 whys or a 3 whys, but sort of the ongoing communication is what I think allows you to look at the productivity and feel like whether you're actually achieving the objectives that you set out to achieve. And again, if those things are tied back to strategic priorities, to the company objectives, because it's rolling up properly to what those objectives are, then the productivity only becomes a concern when you're not hitting your objectives. So I think that as a manager, you probably have to look at productivity, but again, it should come out of the team's performance first, and then that gives you a red flag whether you should be looking deeper to see if there's somebody inside.
Yeah, but could you be productive and not hit the originally intended objective because you were productive?
Because? I'm not sure that was causal.
Because I was productive. So I was productive. And my team was super productive. But it turns out we didn't accurately estimate.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
Yeah.
Constantly.
So, or you don't hit the objective.
Terrible at estimating.
But does that mean that you weren't productive?
No, not necessarily. But you could also totally sandbag your sprint and be like, we got everything done, we crushed it, and we only worked like 50%.
That's the other problem, yes.
Yeah, so yeah, it's super subjective. It's hard to figure that out.
Right.
I think if we all had the perfect answer for that, we'd all be zillionaires and, on a beach somewhere. And
I feel like I do have the perfect answer,
good.
and I'm not a zillionaire.
Well, I mean, as far as we know.
Well, we're all just ready to applause.
Yeah, exactly. Lay it on us. Here we go.
I think I did, and I already missed the opportunity for the applause.
Yeah. One interesting layer to add to this is that I think it is just inherently hard to measure engineering productivity or technology team productivity. It is easy to measure sales in terms of dollars, and it's very short-term tactical. Usually engineering's long-term strategic, like the value comes years later, months later. Some things happen right away, but usually it's accrued over time. And you have usually in companies these very different cultures and mindsets among the executives there, and you ask why. I think there are plenty of short-term, tactical-focused executives who are used to that environment, who are asking the same standards being applied to engineering, and you have to respond to that.
Yeah, I guess I sort of feel like I know where all of this is headed, and we're just right in the middle of this change, which is really difficult. And so you've got the engineering group that's working in these agile methods, using these sprints and figuring out what their shorter term objectives are. And then you have the rest of the company that's essentially working in waterfall and feels like that engineering is still in the deliverables business. And so they're all sitting around and waiting. And I think that if instead the whole company was structured based upon these agile teams, then you would be able to incentivize everybody in the company in a similar way to sales. Because again, if you're running a bunch of teams that are assigned different parts of the product and that there were very measurable outcomes to the work that you were doing that increases customer engagement or decreases churn or any of these other metrics that ultimately affect the company's finances, then those people can all be motivated based upon achieving those objectives. And a lot of the productivity problems go away because people are now motivated based upon achieving objectives where they get some upside.
Cross-functional?
Yeah,
because
right.
What I want to say is, which might prove this, is every time we as a leadership raised sort of the revenue opportunity and attached it to a feature. That feels so wrong. But so it doesn't feel right because like, hey, if you build this feature, we'll make more money. But a form of that always seemed to rile up the engineers to work harder because they were inspired by the fact that what I'm going to work on now is actually going to help this company.
Right.
But it
So
always felt short term, or it always felt like I was blowing some equity.
It's not being structured properly. So what they're doing when they don't do everything engineering is still tied to revenue. It just isn't stated that way. The way it's stated now is that if you guys build 100 features, then we're going to make more money. And so that's like there's no evidence of that. It's just we're going to try this out. But if instead what you suggested is that these features are going to increase user engagement, or people are going to go from a standard plan to a premium plan in a SaaS model, or because we built this functionality, we reduce the number of people that dropped out. You're not giving them a revenue figure. You're giving them a metric that you can sort of one layer beyond that you can tie to financial implications for the company.
Which is more than saying, hey, we want to hit our points estimate. So you're not keeping them in the boiler room of the submarine. You're bringing them up to the deck and saying, hey, if we keep working, we're actually going to get to our destination outside of their domain.
Right.
It ties in with all the themes we've been
talking about. So we've worked with a manufacturing company where the engineers are in the sprints as with sales teams, with salespeople, and the management of the company is saying we need to build this product, we need to do this, we need these features, and it's all put on the engineering group, like as if the financial success and failure of the company is their responsibility solely. And what happened out of the sprint was that the salespeople weren't aware of things that were already in the product, and they weren't aware of how to sell it, and they weren't aware of how to expose that this functionality actually existed. And so what it became instead was the engineering training the salespeople on these type of things. They didn't have to build the product or the features. So I think what we forget is that because we're all in these different silos, the communication is what's really lacking. And so you can expose these things by going more cross-functional, and you know, if objectives, things like that I mentioned before, that this particular product is being used in a particular way that you think is going to have a positive financial result down the road, then that tells us what we should even be measuring. Well, are people using these particular features? If they're not, why not? Is it because it's too buried in the product? Maybe, but maybe it's also because nobody ever told them that existed. So the thing is that when you uncover problems like that, you have a myriad different ways of solving the problem. Engineering becomes one part of solving the problem. Instead of the way it is now, in my view, it's often the product people are are sort of blamed for the problem as opposed to actually having a cross-functional team that's charged with moving that number. Move that number. I don't care how you do it.
And then communication becomes that glue, like proactive communication to between and inter. And I remember one of my problems was we built 30 modules in our CMS, and when we finally implemented analytics, we saw that people were only using 3 of them. And it was criminal the amount of resources as a small company we were applying to the 27, and specifically the one that we literally had below 4% engagement on. And it was the one thing that people were getting fired over at our company. It's like, what the?
That's crazy.
Yeah.
It's like half the time you add one feature, you should probably kill 2 others. You know what I mean? Like strip out the stuff that doesn't matter that people don't like.
It is funny with KPIs on like knowing, like defining what success means for a project before, and then seeing those numbers move afterwards. It's so obvious, so clear. So few people do it. It's so hard to get teams to hold themselves accountable in that way. And you can take a wild guess. Just put a stake in the ground.
But just have something.
Yeah.
So here's everybody in your audience can put into their next sprint plan just randomly choosing a feature and removing it.
Yeah.
And if nobody complained,
Yeah,
then
exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
We removed that feature 6 months ago.
See ya.
Okay, well, that was a good mic drop. Michael, Robert, Brant, thank you for being with me.
Thank you for having us.
See you
Fun
soon.
discussion.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Have you chatted with a CTO lately? Hi, thank you for listening to the CTO Studio. If you don't mind, take a quick second and please rate and review the show. It helps us a lot. Go to the CTOstudio.com for more information on what we're doing at 7 CTOs. We also have a video or 2 for you that could be a helpful resource for you as you're managing your company. So thank you for listening.